Good evening, everybody. The verses I've chosen for today's devotion are Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 11 to 19. What we see here is the warning God gives to the city of Tyre and God's judgment to the city of Tyre. The people here were those who God had used to build God's temple. Instead of following God and instead of experiencing His grace, His wonder, and His glory, they chose to be disobedient. And of course, it ends with a great lamentation. In verse 12, it is said, "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." And in verse 15, it is said, "You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you." What we understand is that Tyre here refers to Lucifer, the guardian angel. He was created with great perfection and beauty. But it was he who brought the wrath of God on him because of pride which came upon him. He wanted to be equal to God. He was a created being who fell through pride. Before his fall, Satan was adorned with great glory and splendor. It was he who brought wickedness into him through pride and greed. But that did not last forever. In Matthew chapter 4, we see Satan testing Jesus. What we can understand from this is that God created each and every one of us with perfection in His own image. We see this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. He created us with splendor and beauty and wonder so that we can enter into His presence and worship Him. He wants us to follow Him, lead a life of purity, perfection, and beauty, fulfilling His wishes. As God's image bearers, we are reflecting His glory all around us. But as earthly beings, we sometimes go away from God. We disobey Him. However, like Tyre, we can be full of pride. When pride enters into our lives, it will make us believe that we are too good for God. We will start thinking that our actions, our gifts, our talents are not from God. They are of our own. Whenever we reach a place like that, that's what is going to cause us to experience disobedience towards God. Disobedience is going to lead to judgment. God created us for worship. When we sin and when we are disobedient, it profanes our worship. We will focus on anything and everything to worship but God. Sin pulls us away from worshiping God to worshiping other things. It does not honor God. When we have sin in our lives, we are unable to worship God the way He should be worshipped. We actually blemish our offerings we bring to Him because our lives are our offerings. There's a reference to this in Romans 12, verse 1. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 16 says, "Through your widespread trade, you were filled with violence and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones." However, when His creation chooses to be disobedient, and when His creation chooses to go against Him, He will administer justice. He will administer judgment. Even though He is going to cast judgment on those who chose to be disobedient, He does not enjoy judgment. He does not take joy in having to administer justice against people who have fallen away from Him. He does not take joy in disciplining and having to cause such destruction on people. That is not who our God is. Our God is loving. He is full of grace. He is full of mercy. His desire is for His creation to know Him. I would like to tell a story here. All of you must be knowing the story. Once there lived a tortoise and a crane near a lake in a forest. They became good friends. The lake was starting to dry due to drought, and the cranes were worried about the tortoise. The tortoise came up with an idea to get to another lake. He asked the cranes to get a strong stick to hold on to it. The cranes would hold on to either side and fly him. The cranes liked the idea. They warned the tortoise not to open his mouth in the sky. As they were flying, people below were watching, and one of them remarked that it was nice of the cranes to carry a tortoise like that. And the tortoise thought it was unfair for the cranes to be praised because it was his idea. He opened his mouth to say that, and he fell to the ground. His pride caused his death here. The truth is, these things can be avoided. Instead of having to experience God's justice and wrath, we can experience His grace. We must put away the sin so that we can fully worship God the way He intended us to do so. For that, we should let pride not come into our hearts. We should be thankful and grateful for the lives God has given us. If we do so, we will not disobey God. We will be free from sins and can be holy. When we are close to God, we can see what sin needs to be removed from us so that we can experience holiness in Him. That can be accomplished by knowing and following Jesus Christ. Sin can be removed from our lives and we can be made pure and we can experience forgiveness. As it is said in 1 John chapter 1, verse 9, if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. Thank you.